Welcome to the Comic Binge. I am your host, Paul Herman, and today we are going to be doing our Comic Binge review of Batman, the Caped Crusader from Amazon Studios? Is that what it is? Amazon Studios? I don't know. It doesn't matter. But anyway, regardless, we've got our regular peeps with us. But before I even get into that, go please subscribe to the Comic Binge if you haven't already. I'd really appreciate it. We've gotten a few new subscribers recently, which has been pretty rad. I really appreciate everyone already has. Keep liking the video, subscribing, all that jazz. I hate to say it, but I got to, I gotta keep it going, y'all. And before I forget, because I felt bad about not doing it last week. Our good friend Rob Dwinas, aka Sketchcraft, his comic Spawn Kills Every Spawn. Look at this cover, guys. This is gorgeous. Look how much detail this is in it. My boy Rob, he's the man. This is at comic stores right now. I think you can still buy issue 1. Issue 2 just dropped last week. I want to make sure people see this and go buy it. Go support our boy Rob, aka Sketchcraft. This is so rad. Like, this is so good. Art is so good. And if you guys know this cover reference for issue 3, you're a baller. That's all I got to say. So anyway. Yes, today we've got Chris, the Reverend Clow. Chris, how we doing today, sir?
A little slightly under the weather, but I can't complain without whining, so let's do this.
I like your style. And last but not least, Javi.
Hey.
El Corazon.
It's Batman time.
It's Batman time. Yes, it is. It is in fact Batman time. So, which, for those who don't know, Javi also did or does the Batman animated series show. Well, I mean, whatever. Co-host.
I mean, it's me and Brian Lauer and Bill and a couple other people. We trade off. But Batman on Film, Javi, Batman Animation Podcast.
Javi, if I could. If I can undermine Lauer any chance I get, I'm gonna do it. Okay, let's just be real. I'm just kidding. I love Lauer, which I'll be name dropping Lauer here in a second for my own purposes in a little bit. But again, please subscribe, hit that like button, all that jazz, yada yada yada. So I bring up the Batman animated show for you guys because you guys broke down the first episode of this, right, for Batman on Film.
Yes, Chris and I did an episode of Batman Animation maybe 3-4 weeks ago, and broke down the pilot in full and welcomed him back to the BOF streams because it's been a minute since Chris has been on a show. So I was very lucky that he agreed to come on and talk Batman with me.
I appreciate the invitation, of course, and it was fun, and we got to. It was like the same. Was it 1 or 2 days after we did Knights Never Die for Arkham Asylum?
It was like 2 days after, I think.
Yeah, it was pretty.
Or no, I think it was like the next night, maybe.
That was a bat-heavy week, which is always a good week. So yeah.
But yeah, episode 52 of Batman Animation. You can go check it out on the Batman on Film website or YouTube channel or the podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts.
Yes. And, that's the thing about, for those who don't know, if you're new to the channel, the Comic Binge is primarily, I'd say, the three of us for the one shape or form or another, which has been awesome. And, we've got a lot of DC content, and that seems to be what people have been checking out the most of. And I think, and maybe that's what people are interested in. I don't know. We got all kinds of content on here, but we've got a plethora of DC stuff. So if you're also new to this, if you're wondering, this is strictly a comic channel. The reason we're reviewing the Caped Crusader is, one, it's relevant to comics in some ways. And also it gives us a chance to talk about it a little bit and also give you guys recommendations for comic books to read after you watch the show. Because if you're into the show, let's go read some comic books, huh? So we'll get to those in a little bit. Obviously, we're going to talk about the show, kind of a general overview. I guess we can do spoilers, I guess. I don't know. I don't really care about media besides comics as spoilers because whatever. Everyone does this. So anyway, Batman the Caped Crusader. This is by Bruce Timm, Matt Reeves, J.J. Abrams. Am I missing anybody else of like or Ed Brubaker? Right,
I was going to say Brubaker and Greg Rucka talking about comic connections. Like Greg Rucka had a fantastic run on Detective Comics, which eventually led to the introduction of the current Batwoman, Kate Kane, not to be confused with the other Kate Kane Batwoman. And
it confused me already.
Yeah. So he reimagined the Golden Age version or Silver Age version, for the 21st century. So, and then with
first
Ed Brubaker, what's that?
First and 52, which we covered on.
Yes,
we did. By the way, people, if you want to know where all this content's at, there's a bunch of playlists. I put a main DC playlist in the description below, so check that out. Javi, continue, please.
Yeah, I was gonna say you've got a stalwart like Greg Rucka who's done a lot of Batman, and so is Ed Brubaker, most notably in Gotham Central, which might get mentioned later on this episode.
I like this. So this was an interesting show, and we'll get into it here because we talked a lot about it, the three of us in our group thread, our infamous now, a thread I love very much. Honestly, I look forward to talking to you guys every day. And one of the things we talked about, and me and Javi kind of went at it a little bit. I say went at it, but very light arguments.
Was it an argument?
Well, it wasn't even an argument. I say that to try to be dramatic. Come on, I'm trying to bring drama into this. Come on, Javi. You're losing it here.
You're wrong, Paul. You're wrong.
There you go. The thing about the show that I was trepidatious about going into it, and it definitely was. It was definitely there still, but it wasn't as bad as I was expecting it to be, was Bruce Timm's involvement and having it be emphasis of Batman the Animated Series, looking like that kind of style. It's definitely not that completely, which I think but it's still a heavy influence. And I'm just going to say that outright. That was probably my biggest con of the whole show. And that, for full disclosure, I just want to get that out of the way first. I'm of the mind I would have preferred a little more unique in its own voice, as far as I say voice in a way of a dynamic look. But excuse me. But that being said, it was interesting to kind of know they went that route, going down that route. And I know, Javi, I'll throw it to you, and I'll throw it to you next, Chris. You didn't have a problem with that as much as me, correct?
Correct. Yeah. And okay. It was really Chris that interjected with that conversation, pointing out, comic book artists and how, someone like John Romita Jr., like when he does Spider-Man, it looks like John Romita Jr. Spider-Man, and just like it evolves, but it doesn't necessarily deviate too much.
Right.
And having Bruce Timm as like the artist, of course it's going to look like Bruce Timm stuff, because Bruce Timm stuff looks like Bruce Timm stuff, just like Alex Ross stuff does or Frank Miller stuff does. So if you look at it from like that perspective, when you go to pick up like whoever your favorite artist is,
right,
that comic is going to look like that artist's work. And that's kind of what it is here. And sure, there are like period sensibilities, and he gets to have a little more freedom in how they tell the story and what's allowed and what isn't, trying to aim for a specific audience. But there's also just a lot of like Matt Reeves influence as well. I'm curious to think, now that you guys have seen more of it, what, if any, like J.J. Abrams influence you found in the show.
Here's J.J. Abrams influence. Looks good, guys. See you later. Listen, and I'm not a JJ hater like some people. I can't really do that. Anyway,
are you trying to point at both of us, or just figuring out direction?
Sure, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. No, but I'm sure he had some. But Matt Reeves and JJ are kind of
JJ's fine. He's just made over the last 10 years, he's just made one really bad movie. That's all.
You stop it right now. I just want to
No,
make sure very clear. You tread lightly, sir. You tread lightly.
apologies to
Anyway.
my cousin Cole, but Star Trek Into Darkness is not a good movie. It's not.
I like Into Darkness. I like Into Darkness. That's not what Chris is referring to. Listen, Linda, listen. The thing is, I always forget is Matt Reeves' connection to J.J. Abrams. And that's why I think more so than anything, that probably like, it's kind of like maybe. Yeah, he was part of they're connected. I know that somehow. I want to say they're actual friends. I could be wrong, but either way, the Matt. So let me throw this. That's good. That's a good segue into this, actually, Javi, if you don't mind. Matt Reeves. What exactly is his influence on this show? I'm curious. I'll throw it to both of you because I maybe for sure. I don't know what the exact influence would be necessarily.
Chris, you want to go?
I mean, I'm not sure if his influence was necessarily like super overt. I would think that it has to do more with tone more than anything else. Granted, you get to where you need to go, or at least like 80% of the way you need to go with just Brubaker, and Bruce Timm, effectively the showrunner, but Brubaker, it sounds like, had kind of a position as like a head writer for what they were doing. And I feel like in their respective mediums, if we're talking about Brubaker as a comics creator, his sensibilities as a comics creator are very similar to Matt Reeves' sensibilities as a filmmaker. So I feel like there's a lot of like symbiosis there in terms of what they want to emphasize in a particular story and how a story makes you feel. There were several instances of this where I was very pretty effectively reminded of what the experience is like of reading an Ed Brubaker Batman comic, because it's been a long time since we've had one of those. And this is a world that he feels very comfortable in. And it just seems like, especially considering like the period element of it, alongside the relative truthfulness to Batman's modern characterizations, it's a very unique fusion between those sensibilities. And Brubaker has done, how many noir comics has he done that take place in exactly this period? A lot. So I feel like it's just more of like a complementary notion, and Reeves as a creator, I'm sure, can give insight into efficiencies in the storytelling, and he's also someone who has very effectively demonstrated his reverence for Batman and the world that he occupies. So it's just a strong bench overall.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that's a good point. It probably is more so like and the way I see Matt Reeves and maybe J.J. Abrams were probably overseeing it to make sure, and Matt Reeves also probably trying to make sure the tone is going to be similar and not go too crazy with where maybe he wanted to go with the Batman saga that he's doing over in with live action, and also he probably is a huge fan, whatever, and get some extra Skrilla doesn't always hurt, give some notes to people as a producer. I didn't, to be honest, it felt very much animated series, but for like adults ish, maybe. But I'll even push back on that myself, because I actually watched this with my 4-year-old daughter. I know it probably wasn't the smartest thing, because they kind of swear a little bit, but I'm a little more liberal with my art people. But that being said, it was interesting to watch it, because she liked it. Like she was into it. It felt like it was a more kind of like a thing you could watch with your kids who are older, not if you're a nutcase like me, like your 4-year-old watch it. But that being said, it definitely felt like animated series, like cousin. And I say that both as like a little bit of a detriment, but not as much, like I said earlier, but also in a positive light, because that is obviously the best, maybe some of the best Batman stories ever told were in that animated series, and you're getting that vibe. But the one thing I like about this show is that where it takes place, right? Like it's not going out of the
Gotham?
bounds of, was that?
I said Gotham.
Well, I'm sorry, when it takes place.
Yeah.
When like because it like the thing about the animated series, but it felt it's supposed to be like Art Deco, and have it be this futuristic 30s style, which is interesting. But this is a straight up like what the 30s was that 40s? Is that what it's supposed to be, the 40s? Am I correct on this? I'm always
I
bad
read
with
40s out of it, but I don't know if I've actually seen that confirmed, but the aesthetic appears 40s to me.
Yeah. So it's cool to get like a very time specific Batman that has all these new different villains, which we'll get into, which I can't wait to get into, to be quite honest. And I did like the fact that I felt that Bruce Timm style that you were talking about, Javi. That's where I think it let me kind of be a little bit more lax with my criticism on that, because it fits that aesthetic so well that it to me it worked. It works for this this time frame and the simplicity and everything. I think it was really cool, and the how they're doing like all these different aspects of the Batman universe together, and they're kind of combining things kind of like the animated series did, but in a very unique way, like with Flash and then also Harvey Bullock. I love that inclusion that they're in what they represent, and with Gordon and Barbara, like, and all these different things. I'm like, they're incorporating kind of newer aspects, which we'll get into obviously with Harley Quinn and things like that.
You say newer, but Harley is 30 years old now.
Well, you know what I'm saying, like
yeah, but it's
go ahead.
It's a weird perspective because she does feel like a new character, but that was 30 years ago. Bane was 30 years ago. That's my kids weren't alive when those characters debuted, and now they're like 2 months away from being legal adults. So
that probably also speaks to just how rare it is for new villains to truly like break into
great point
the mainstreaming of Batman stories and into the rogues gallery, because there aren't all that many examples of characters since Crisis that have really stuck around, with Black Mask, Harley, of course, Bane, Hush, I guess.
Hush is borderline. He's what was that?
Cyborg Superman, Doomsday.
Oh yeah, I was just referring specifically to Batman characters.
Oh,
but
okay.
Yeah, Hank Henshaw certainly counts in that, especially the way that he's been used over the past few decades. But there are really not all that many villains that break in, and that's honestly one of the things that really fascinates me about this show, is that we get a couple of the heavy hitters, some really keen and solid reimaginings of relatively typical Batman villains. But this show also goes kind of outside the box in populating, Firebug is not exactly the first. And, you have Clayface, of course, but Onomatopoeia, not a classically Batman villain. You've even got an appearance from Papa Midnight in here. We're getting into Hellblazer territory, which is pretty wild. And also, Nocturna and Night Slayer. Like they're moving into like a higher level of confidence. You don't necessarily need to have the Joker in every episode when there are so many other fascinating characters to explore.
All right. So I'm sorry, Chris. I just realized something, and I feel like a goddamn idiot. The little girl who looks like Wednesday Addams, right?
Yeah.
That's Nocturna?
Yeah.
Or at least a version of her. Yeah.
Dude. Because We'll save it. I
That's-
want to save it for we'll save Javi. We'll save that because
we're gonna get there. Don't worry.
we're gonna get there. So because and that's what get great segue, guys. Great, not even planning this, just great segues for all this stuff. By the way, I'm gonna say that's the strength of this whole series was the fact that you're relying on you're being really creative with the villains. That I think that's why the animated series did so well, because as a Batman fan or as a comic book fan in the early 90s, I was a Marvel kid. Marvel Zombie all the way. Obviously, over the last 15 years, I've got way more to DC, and my education of them has been a crash course in the last 15 years, and thanks to mainly this guy over here named Chris Clow. I've grown to really love DC Comics more so than I ever thought I would. But my establishing love of DC really comes from the Batman media outside of comics, besides maybe Nightfall. And like, I thought the animated series did a great job of like introducing me to characters like Two-Face, Clayface, the Mad Hatter, or actually some of those characters I knew from the 66 show, but a lot of those characters I didn't really know very well and I got to know them and thought they were cool through the animated series. And I knew a majority of these characters on here, but Javi will tell you, I pop at midnight, I'm like, who the hell is this guy? And he's like, you don't know this? I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't know this person. And that's the cool thing was this series relied on the rich history of Batman characters, and also used ones like, again, you have Two-Face here, but like Catwoman. But I thought using the two different Clayfaces, you've got the Onomatopoeia character, which I knew was a Kevin Smith creation. I knew him automatically because it was a big deal when Kevin Smith wrote that comic. I was like, oh, like it's a Kevin Smith guy. I had no idea what his deal was, and I automatically was like, I'm into this guy. So, and then we'll get into Harley Quinn in a second, but in Firebug, is it Firebug? Which one is it?
Firebug.
Firefly is a different dude.
Yeah.
Wait, there's two different fire characters?
That's what I was saying. Firebug isn't the first pyromaniac I think of in Gotham. It's Garfield Lens. And Firebug,
which is Firefly.
Yeah.
And this isn't even, there's more than one Firebug.
Yeah.
Anyway, my point is this. To me, the strength of the show is the character, like the villains that they chose for this, and how they're able to really do something different with these characters. And again, we'll get into the Penguin here a little bit as well. But that's a strength. I was really surprised of how they were able to tap in with some of the classics, reinvent them a little bit. And again, we'll get to the reinventing part. Well, but also, go ahead.
That's the thing too, though, is because yes, this show does employ reinvention as a device for a lot of these villains, but there's also instances like Carlo in particular, where it's not a reinvention as much as it is just kind of introducing what the golden age conception of Clayface was to a wider audience and through a more modern lens. Like reading the original Clayface story, the broad strokes are relatively similar to the episode that he appeared in early on in this show. And it's to its strength because there was a core harshness and maturity level to particularly early Golden Age Batman stories that has not really been fodder for adaptation for the better part of 40 years. And now they're starting to move into that. And you pair those relatively, you could argue, traditional versions of the characters with creative application of reinvention. And it has a very unique identity to it, but at the same time too, some of these reinventions, and Javi and I talked about this, yes, visibly they are quite a shakeup, but character-wise, I recognize this person very much. And that's right out of the gate in the first episode. But I mean, also like Catwoman, like it's not a huge departure from things that we've seen before, but the mechanics of the storytelling are also efficient enough that it just moves on at such a brisk pace and presents a particular issue for Batman to overcome in that story in this way, while evoking some really early stories. Like, this is just a really classy adaptation that draws from so many different levels and eras of Batman mythology that it's kind of hard not to be amazed by how well they pull it off.
Yeah, and if I can add to the like Matt Reeves of it all, like what his influence may or may not have been, like obviously he loved the 66 show, and we do see a lot of those similar villains to it. And there's one or two little nods to the show in an upcoming, I guess it's already out, so it's not upcoming, but episode 7 has the onomatopoeia episode has quite a few 60s winks to it. And I think just generally, like, outside of 2 episodes, this is adjacent to like the world building that Matt Reeves is doing, where it's very grounded. You're dealing with the criminal element, not so much super villainy or fantastical elements, other than like 2 episodes. And that primarily, though, like the Batman Alfred relationship is very much, it feels very similar to the one that we see in the Batman, the film. And the growth that relationship takes over time echoes what, we saw 2 years ago on the big screen. And to Chris's point too, just with animation and characters sticking around, like the last Batman show we had, like that was not Batwheels, Beware the Batman, also had to find its own niche and identity, and not always, bring out the same core villains all the time. So they went back to Anarchy was a big player. Katana, who's not a villain, but she was a big player in the show. So they had like Metamorphose. We had a lot of older 70s and 80s characters, but then they mixed it in with more fresh characters like Professor Pig and Toad were in that show. So, and this is kind of doing that as well. We have a lot of Golden Age villains like Catwoman and Clayface, but then we've got, Onomatopoeia thrown in the mix as well. And then Nocturna, straight from the 80s. So they're cherry picking a few classics and mixing in some that, aren't seen as well. And tonight we'll get into some of those characters' origins, which is going to be a lot of fun to talk about.
Well, and really quickly, I think you guys are all bringing up great points of the strength of the show, is that because there is that, you don't have to worry. You're not trying to satisfy the fans. Like, we got to put the Joker in this. We got to put this in here, because you're able to really give Batman some villains that you can kind of play around with some fun story aspects, because you're building up not only these characters, but you have to build up Batman, because Batman's still pretty new on the scene, right? So you have to create these different, you're creating different characters, different situations with these villains for Batman to show what he's capable of. And you're now, as we're kind of as an audience are understanding, like, we already know what Batman's capable of because we read the comics, but for the general audience, it's like, oh, this Batman is really good at this. And I think going back to Papa Midnight, like the whole supernatural thing, I was like, okay, is this gonna be a Scooby-Doo ending? Like, hey, was this guy all along? And when he captures him in like that, whatever, I was like, oh shit, like they actually went like supernatural with this. Okay. Like I was like, oh, this is actually gonna be a supernatural thing. Okay. I think that to me was good.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, this is a convention anecdote, but Brubaker likes the cosmic side of the DC universe and the mystical side of the DC universe, even though he didn't really play in it very much. When I went to Emerald City in, gosh, it must have been like 2008, maybe 2009, I asked him what he thought about them turning Crispus Allen into the Spectre. And he was just like gushing for like a minute about how that was such a cool idea, So if and I mean Jim Corrigan shows up in this show, of course, but it wouldn't surprise me if in a second season Brubaker might want to dip a little bit more than a toe into that mystical side of the DCU again by laying the groundwork here. And there's enough
Yeah.
Golden Age fuel for that it could probably be really cool. I mean, what the Dark Moon Rising is probably proof enough of how cool you can get by staying supernatural in the Golden Age. And I hope that they can do that. It'd be wild if like Mad Monk and Monster Men were adapted into episodes of this show, because that would be really cool.
And that's the aspect that I think the show has really tapped into, that I think that the animated series did a little bit too, but they have restrictions because they're aimed for children specifically, so there was a lot of restrictions on them. Or I know there's a story a whole behind that, but they had some restrictions, obviously, right? Well, now they don't have that. And I think what's really cool is that you made up a great point. The groundwork's laid there for so many different people. And I think the fact that now like we can get even more supernatural in this, instead of just doing like straight up monsters, we have like you by that episode, and a pretty fun episode, like you kind of now like prepared us as an audience what to expect, which is really cool. So I love that. Yeah, I guess for me, like just kind of getting some of these characters a little bit more. To be honest, like I thought Christina Ricci's Catwoman was pretty fun. I liked how she was a little more of a clumsy character, but she was still Catwoman. And there was like this kind of like, well, gee shucks, I'm just not very good at this. And I like that. That was maybe it's just me, but and I don't know Catwoman that well, but it felt like that was a different take, which I liked and appreciated. One thing this might be a little bit of a hot take, but I'm not going to lie. I love this Harley Quinn. This might be like my favorite version of Harley Quinn. Like I love this version. This is a way more serious and more twisted, demented Harley Quinn than we've seen before, in my opinion. And for me, I remember I kind of expected like, okay, we got Harley Quinn because Harley Quinn, whatever. But the fact they made her away from the Joker, and you kind of really use her character and what she represents as a Harley Quinn, right? And like what all that means with these other people as she has and underneath her freaking as her, I don't know, it's just dark, man. I was like, damn, this is like dark. And I really liked it. I thought it was really, really cool. And I thought I think this might be the version we need to have more of in the comics. Maybe, well, not really now after, obviously, Margot Robbie, but I don't know. I thought this Harley Quinn character version was, to me, maybe my favorite one, to be honest. I thought it was really cool and interesting. I'm curious what you guys thought of Harley Quinn. Oh, is someone muted?
Yeah, that would be me.
Okay. I don't hear anything.
I really enjoyed the show or her portrayal in the show, and I've liked the evolution of the character in the comics, and how she's moved on from her relationship with the Joker and got her own cast of characters and has been doing her own thing under Amanda and Jimmy. And this is different. It's a step away from that, and it's like Bruce Timm said, they're flipping it. And it's the creator of, or the co-creator of the character, doing something fresh with it. And I don't know, I'm just kind of here for it, because it makes her more of a threat, especially in the
agreed.
third episode, where she's not interviewing Bruce. She has Bruce as a patient, and then gets later brought in to analyze Batman for the police to come up with a plan to catch him. And it makes me wonder where they're going to go with her in the future, if she's going to get close to figuring out Batman's identity, because she's had this time with Bruce Wayne and knows what kind of goes into making the Batman. Like it's just a different take on it. And the fact that she's in her private life, she's like intertwined with Montoya and with Barbara Gordon, and like it just makes it everything more complicated on a relationship level of what, you know, this character means to the antagonist or to her antagonists.
Right. No, totally. Chris, really quick, I'll get your take, and then we'll move on to the kind of Batman in general, or we'll move on to the Penguin, Batman, then we'll get to comic recommendations and wrap it up.
Yeah, I mean, you guys know I'm not really a huge fan of Harley as a character, generally speaking. So I'm fine with a new take on Harley Quinn. And yeah, I enjoyed this one. There's like a sense of righteousness that she brings to it that is unusual in terms of, you know, just prior characterizations of Harley that we've seen, but also there's a vindictiveness that is usually alluded to with her, at least in some of the stories where she's played more for like shock value as opposed to kind of going off and doing her own thing. But here, with a vindictiveness that is rooted in a sense of righteousness, it's creepy. And it kind of gave me the same sort of feeling as that moment in Batman Begins where Crane is just about to bust his mask out for the first time, you know, and Falcone says, "So when did the nut take over the nut house?" And it's just like this kind of unsettling like level of surprise. I mean, I knew it was coming, of course, but for a lot of people who might not have, it's just like, this person's brain, like the phone has been left off the hook, and there's an added level of danger to this person that didn't exist just a few minutes ago when they were having their nice appointment in the office. And that part of it is really cool. I kind of hope, I mean, considering the way the season ends, I guess maybe it's not necessarily a guarantee. I hope she can stand on her own for longer. I feel like, you know, a meetup with the Joker is probably inevitable. That doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be partners or allies, but
yeah,
I think that there's definitely enough runway to explore this a little bit more on a solo basis with her. And I love that the show is confident enough to explore these other elements of these characters that have really kind of always been there, but have maybe not been particularly well emphasized either in other adaptations or, in Harley's case, in the comics. You know, there's been a lot of exploration of Harley's character over the years, particularly in the hands of Amanda Conner and Jimmy Palmiotti, but she's more of like in wrestling parlance, she's more of a tweener. She's not completely a face. She's not completely a heel. She's somewhere in the middle. She's closer to DC's Deadpool than probably anybody else. And this takes her in a whole other direction. And I'm here for it. I think it's good.
All right. So we'll move on to Penguin, the Batman, then we'll get to comic recommendations. I'm just gonna start right now. I expected a lot more like negativity on this. I know it's there. I'm not saying it's not there. I expected a lot more people to be like, blah! And there was a little bit, but there wasn't as much as I thought there was going to be quite honest. So that was interesting. At least for me personally, I didn't see it as much as maybe anyone else did. The one thing I'm going to say about this is listen, gender swapping just to do something different. It's, you know, there's pros and cons to it. It can be lazy, just like any kind of writing choice can be. The one thing I'm going to say about this, when I first saw this, I'm like, okay, I'm not like, this is a great idea or a bad idea. I'm like, well, let me see what they do. And call me woke, call me whatever the hell you want, because I really don't care. But I really don't. But I will say this. I thought the Penguin gender swap was kind of brilliant. And I'm not a big fan of the female Dr. Octopus either, by the way. That's not like, you know, I'm not like, this is genius either. I thought that was fine. I'm like, whatever. I can live with it. I'm not going to like get mad about it. Not my favorite thing in the world, but whatever. I actually think the penguin thing is interesting. And I thought it was interesting for a couple different aspects. One, does have a female character in lead of the mob. I thought was interesting, different, right? But when you added the aspect of her children, and let's be real, the thing is with, you know, a mother's relationship with their children it's always gonna be different than their father, right?
Yeah.
And when to establish her children in the first episode, I was like, whoa, she has kids and this is her kids and what happens with them. I'm like, God damn. Like I immediately fell in love with this character because of how like that whole dynamic was. I thought it was pretty brilliant. That was a pretty inspired choice that I don't think people are giving enough credit. Now, to be fair, my friends, I have not listened to your episode yet, so I feel like a jerk by saying that. But I really like this aspect of the penguin, and I really thought it was a kind of an inspired choice. Call me Mr. Woke. Call me WB Shill. Don't really care, but I thought it was cool. I'm curious what you guys, what your thoughts were on that. Quickly,
he really didn't listen to our episode about it, did he, Javi? He really.
I told you I didn't. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. All right, quickly.
I'll just say, if you had Vito Corleone kill Fredo, it doesn't have, it's impactful, but not as impactful as Oswalda killing her favorite son and not even really blinking an eye about it. Like,
and now you're my favorite.
You know, it's yes, a parent killing their child is a big deal, but we're not going to understand the bond that a mother has with, you know, any child that grew inside her for 9 months. So that right there, and the singing was a creative way to introduce this new iteration, and it's all the multiverse. Oswald is still Oswald in the Batman, in the comics. Like it's all imagination and fun and different universes, and
yeah,
that's just how it is here. And those other ones still exist. So
it's like the
I got
Harley
a kick
Quinn
out of it.
Yeah,
if I want to watch Batman the Animated Series, I can go watch Batman the Animated Series. This doesn't supplant it or take its place.
Yeah.
Well, also Chris? Too, at the end of the day, I mean, these characters, especially when you're talking the top tier, and I would put the Penguin in that category. When you're talking the top tier of Batman characters, broadly speaking, that have been adapted multiple times over multiple decades, I don't necessarily need a creative justification for that kind of a different take, because it's different. You know, it's by definition, there is novelty to the idea of exploring these characters through different lenses.
Yeah, and, exactly.
However, in this case, there was an intense creative justification for it for precisely the reason that you guys were discussing. The viciousness of Oswalda Cobblepot is exceedingly familiar to anybody who knows Oswald Cobblepot. There is a streak of insecurity. There's a streak of just meanness, like just utter raw meanness deep in the soul of Oswald Cobblepot that continues to drive the Penguin to do the things that the Penguin will do. Throwing the idea of her vindictiveness being seen through the eyes of her children and showing how she carelessly murders one of her children without really batting an eye, as Javi alluded to, that speaks so loudly about how familiar this Penguin is. Because if Oswald Cobblepot in the Prime DC universe was a woman and was a mother, he's such a vindictive bastard that you could absolutely see him do that to one of his children. And there's something about a mother doing that to a child that just seems like it hits, at least to me, seems like it hits a lot harder for anybody who values a relationship with their mother, or really anybody who doesn't, that might have more of an in to understanding how tumultuous a relationship that can be. This is the volume cranked up to 11 on that kind of dynamic, but it also pushes forward the same kind of ethos that the Penguin has always had. Just through this particular lens, you're able to absorb it in a different way that gets you relatively to the same destination, but it's a hell of a ride to get there. And I can't say enough about how not only refreshing, but horrifying this version of the Penguin was. Even if you had like a dick spraying giant umbrella machine at the end of that episode, it doesn't really matter. This is a vicious Penguin and stands, head and shoulders with any other version of the Penguin as far as I'm concerned. And when Javi and I were talking about it, I hadn't seen the rest of the season yet. So I was like, I'm looking forward to seeing her again. And he's like, well, you don't see her again. And it's like, damn it. There is a lot.
I was surprised.
There's a lot left to do here. And I hope they do it, because if Oswaldo Cobblepot gets anywhere near like supervillain status, or even just like mob boss, if there's a power vacuum in the underworld of Gotham, of this Gotham, there's a lot of really interesting avenues to explore on top of the period. That adds a whole other level to like the dynamics of sex and leadership that were permeating American society in the 40s and 50s. But when you have a personality as vicious as Oswaldo Cobblepot, what is she going to do to secure her spot at the top of the underworld? That I would love to see.
Yeah, no, totally. So wrapping up with the show, and we can't talk about the show without talking about the man himself, right? We can't stop talking about, really quick, the Batman himself. I'll kind of lead us off here. I thought the Batman character was pretty solid. I thought I liked his Bruce. I liked the voices. I definitely got shades of the animated series a little bit, but not in a bad way. Good influence. I really like this version. I like there is a sense of like, I wouldn't say clumsiness, but he is learning still, and you're getting that, but he's efficient. And just seeing him in this era has really been fun. And I don't know, I bought into it, and I'll be honest, when I eventually got through the season, I kept watching with my daughter, and I kept being like, we gotta watch Batman. I want to keep watching. And she's like, I'm like, And so for me, I liked this version of Batman. I thought it was, he's a little bit more, I mean, he's always going to be dark and brooding and a loner a little bit, but it really feels they're emphasizing that, like, when he gets frustrated at Alfred a bunch, and he calls him, look, Pennyworth. Like, he kind of throws that out there. It's interesting character development they're doing subtly, I feel, that is working for me, that he's learning how to be Batman and how to be human at the same time. Still a human being. So there's some cool stuff they're doing here. The show is cooking, and I really hope this comes out sooner than expected, and there's more episodes next time, because I love this version of Batman.
Yeah,
anybody else?
I do too. I think one of the things that I found most interesting about this Bruce Wayne in particular was in the therapy session with Quinzel, because not only a negative connotation to trappings, but there are things you expect about Batman's origin story and the way that it's going to go, and the outlets that he finds to to let off the pressure of the intense feelings that have been created after the trauma that he endured in Crime Alley. And what I liked about Quinzel's examination of him was that, I mean, we've all heard stories, I'm sure, about our grandparents and the, let's say, unwillingness to explore psychological defects, right? There was a particular way a man was supposed to act at the time, and it was to bury those feelings. There was not like people complain about touchiness and feeliness today, but it's a good way to avoid repression of trauma, to try and find a better way. Because back in these days, people just buried those things, didn't address them, they festered and turned into what they turned into, right? But Bruce Wayne in the 1940s or 50s, probably 40s, would naturally repress discussion of those feelings, but he has a positive outlet, and that positive outlet for him to express himself in the way that he needs to is Batman. And that's something that has arguably been pretty consistent about Batman's character. You know, there are so few people that he opens up to in most versions of the character's history. You know, Alfred eventually, Alfred is someone that he does open up to, and you get a sense of that in this show even, and Leslie Tompkins. But it's not like Bruce Wayne pours his heart out on a regular basis. But then you add like the I guess the predominant vision of what masculinity was like during this time with Batman's trauma, and it comes out in those examinations with Quinzel, and it's like, yeah, this could be a problem. At least he can be Batman and express himself that way. But every other time, he is bottling it up to the point that Quinzel acknowledges that even for her, his barriers that he built, his walls that he has built, are too high to cross. And what a good encapsulation of Batman's mindset. You know, Scott Snyder one time talked about how Batman is probably one of comics' most unreliable narrators. And I think he's absolutely right. Batman's emotional honesty at times can be very minimal. And you get the sense, especially early on in this season, just how tortured he really is with so few outlets. And that was something I found very refreshing. But then at the same time, it doesn't shy away from the fact that he is a hero. You know, that first team up with Jim Gordon, I got chills seeing them actually start to work together for the very first time to save those kids in the burning building. And like, this is how he builds that new family. We're on the very ground floor. And maybe that's the shadow of a hint at what Gordon is ultimately going to see Batman as an ally. There's a lot of levels to that. And I love the characterization of Bruce Wayne here.
Really quick before I hit it to you, Javi, I'm addressing Garrett real quick. To me, yeah. I think we all probably agree that it's set in that time period, it's a different reality, I think, 1940s setting, but it's, to me, because obviously they're emphasizing people of color and you know, and there's no like weird, you know, obviously a lot more racism back then than there was, you know, a lot more and everything like that. So I think it's not, obviously it's a different reality, but it is, to me, I'm sure if you guys really quickly, I took it as literally 1940s alternate reality. Like, would you guys agree to that?
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
I mean, he uses a mercury vapor lamp in the crime lab. It's not a very common tool used by criminologists. And granted, that doesn't necessarily preclude what Garrett's talking about.
No, sure. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
It definitely seemed like they're owning the period. And It didn't seem like to me like they were taking the animated series approach where the aesthetic was sort of period design, but they still had computers with black and white screens, so it's technically today, but not quite. This seemed more explicit to try and root itself in a bygone era of Batman stories that is dependent on analog as opposed to anything digital.
Yeah. Javi, what's your take on Batman? Then we'll get into comic recommendations.
Just to answer Garrett's question really quick, the perspective that I've had on this series and this whole year is, we're in the 85th anniversary of this character. And with maybe a book we're going to recommend in a minute, I think going back to the roots of the character, like it's just a part of that 85th celebration is to have a story set in that original time period. So I can see how Garrett could, interpret it differently, but, and I don't think there's any harm in looking at it like that either. But for me, it's set, 1939, 1940. And I don't really know if I have anything more to add on Batman. He's Batman, I think he disappears a little bit in the middle of the show as some of the other characters take the forefront, but that's not, I'm talking about it on an upcoming podcast with Bill. I think it drops next week, where the animated series did that too. Not every episode was Batman focused. Okay. But I like what they did to the character. It feels true. And I really like seeing Playboy Bruce Wayne again, because it feels like just across like all media, like we don't see a lot of that these days. He's not there in the Batman universe yet. Not a whole lot of Bruce Wayne in the comics currently, unless you read Batman and Robin, where he's going to Damien's soccer game. And, video games, obviously not really a thing either. So it was nice to have that balance. And I like what Linklater did, differentiating the two characters. So
he did a good job. He did a solid job for sure.
Yeah, that Penguin episode in particular, just where he dove off of the boat, right? But he came up and was like, "Oh, whoopsie!" Ah.
Yeah, it's not a party unless someone falls off a yacht.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
or whatever.
All right.
I have to bug out, but
all right.
Thank you.
Hi, man.
Feel better, Chris.
Much appreciated, guys. Take care. Thanks to everybody who watched, and read more comics.
There you go. Love you.
Take it easy, bud.
All right. So anyway, all right, Javi. So let's go into comic book recommendations, where everyone's been waiting for, obviously.
All right.
I mean, right? I mean, come on.
Let's go back to the beginning. Let me do these two first before we get to one of yours here.
I'll do mine last. I only have one.
Oh,
so I'll do mine last. Yeah, you do your thing. I have to use the little boys' room. But you go do your thing.
Gotcha. All right. Well, first up, I'm going to go with Detective Comics 40, known primarily for being the first appearance of Clayface. So it's just a short story. There's lots of different little stories that make up the whole issue. But this is our first glimpse of Basil Carlo. And it's fun. There's a lot of film noir aspects, a lot of mood, a lot of shadow. And at the time, Bruce is engaged to Julie Madison. And just the dialogue, it's kind of weird, or not weird. It's hard to read sometimes just because of the printing style and how they reproduced it. It looks a little washed out. And it's definitely like a little charming to read how they talk and how they think, and like how they say oh instead of like uh-oh. But and here we have Julie Madison, wishing Bruce was more like Batman, which just feels so classic-y, very tropey for the period. But Clayface comes back one more time in Detective Comics number 49. basically it's kind of like Clayface's revenge for what happens in the first issue that he appeared in. So these are very similar to the episode we got in the show. And you can see there's a movie set, and that leads to just a classic fight of Batman and Clayface in a miniature city that just feels very Mask of the Phantasm and all the other 50s comics that dealt with oversized props. And of course, and this was something I didn't know about, Julie Madison, because of the success of her first movie that was in issue 40, she gets a new name. It's like Portia something. And Bruce is just like, oh, okay, that's just how it was. Like Hollywood, you get a new name when you become a star. But like her star is ascending, and she just feels like Bruce isn't present. Like he doesn't do anything with his life. And she's like, I love you, but if you're not going to do anything, I got to call this off. But she walks away from the relationship there, and Batman just takes it all in stride because Robin gets imperiled, and Robin is his best friend, he says, and it doesn't really seem to faze him. There's not, like, if this was a comic that came out today, there would be a lot of like we saw with the wedding issue for Batman, like, I've got to be Batman and I can't be Bruce Wayne, and I love her but I can't put her. There's none of that. She ditches him and he's just like, cool, you can see right there. But
I understand.
Both of these were really fun to read, and we don't see Basil Carlo again until the Mud Pack in 88 or 89, because he disappears. And then in the 50s it becomes Matt Hagen, who has kind of Carlo's backstory in the animated series, but with the Matt Hagen name. So that's the thing about Clayface, is they all get kind of muddied together. So that's your Clayface recommends, the first two ones with Basil Carlo. We're going to jump forward a few decades.
If I may interject just 1 second.
Yeah, go for it.
Are all your recommendations on this by chance?
They certainly are, Paul.
Okay.
That's how I read them.
Okay. So just for the record, you can get all these and I get no publicity. This is free publicity. Like, I just want people to read more comics. That's all I care about.
Yeah.
So, and Javi's telling you what they are here. The issue numbers, they're all available in DC Universe. Please continue, Javi. Go select your next thing.
We are going to jump forward a few decades to the early 80s. But okay, we're going to go actually to issue 318, which introduced Firebug. And I was reading it last night. I'm like, I kind of got some Iron Man, like evil Iron Man vibes from his mask.
Dude, full disclosure, I didn't know the context for when you first sent it to us in our thread group, and I went, "Who's this? Is this from Infinity War? Like, they have the evil doppelgangers, I was like, what is this? Why are you sending me this picture of doppelganger Iron Man, And then I went, oh.
Yeah. So this was an entertaining read, interesting costume, but he's kind of done in one. This Firebug. And he's
what issue number is this?
This is 318.
So Batman series 318. It's like, it'll be like what in Infinite, it'll be like 19 whatever it is, 40 something to like
40 to
1990 or 2000,
whatever, 2006.
So
whenever 2008. Also, when was New 52?
A cool new trick I found out in Infinite, which is Marvel Unlimited doesn't do, and it drives me up the goddamn wall, is you can put in Batman. If you search engine Batman 318, it will show up at not like by itself, but you'll see it. You'll go, oh, there it is right there. So just for any issue you guys want out there, it's if they have it, it'll bring up other things as well that it thinks you're trying to get. But if it has it, it's going to show up there. It's pretty rad.
Yeah. And I got to shout out to Ryan Lauer at the Batman Book Club. He did an episode of Batman Animation with Peter Vera where they discussed that Ed Brubaker introduced a new firebug in Gotham Central. So maybe that has something to do with his episode that he wrote. But jump in the very next issue, Batman 319, Gentleman Ghost. He had appeared a few issues prior to this, but if you're not familiar with this Golden Age villain who dealt a lot with the JSA, this is a good introduction to what he is. And, there's debate on whether or not it's special effects that he's using or if there's some kind of spiritual aspect to the character. But this is a good primer. It gives you enough to get into the character, and if you're not familiar with him before, so it's a pretty decent read.
For the record, I'm not being rude on my phone. I'm actually looking these up right now so I can save them, and I'm not even joking with you. I'm like, I need to save these. All right, 318. God dang it! This is Infinite just crashed on me. So there, I'm saying negative things too. Don't just take me as a homer here. Let me see here. Batman 3.
But yeah, 318, 319, and 319. It picks up from events from a few issues ago where Batman dealt with the Grey Ghost. Gentleman Ghost.
I just put 318. It showed right up, no problem. First thing I put. You guys see that right there? Batman 318. Bam!
There you go.
It's pretty cool. Infinite's is dope AF, dude. I'm telling you.
I don't use it as much as I should. I use it a decent amount, but there's so much to read on there. Moving on, we got Batman 361, which is in the middle of a Man-Bat story. You can see there's Jason Todd, who is redheaded at this point because this is pre-Crisis. He hasn't dyed his hair yet. His origin is he's still from the circus, just like Dick. His parents got murdered by Killer Croc. So for the bulk of this issue, it's Batman dealing with Man-Bat, who's kidnapped Jason because he feels that Batman killed his daughter. And so he's trying to get another kid and turn him into a Man-Bat.
Is this Mensch?
Yes. And the reason I bring this
Mensch.
The reason I bring this issue up is at the very last page, we get the introduction of Harvey Bullock. Who is corrupt and working for Mayor Hill. They're trying to get Gordon out of office. And even though Harvey's been drummed off the force, Mayor Hill has brought him back to get the goods on Gordon so they can get him out of there because Hill is corrupt. I didn't know this. This is primarily like my experience with Mayor Hill is from the animated show. But it turns out, he was not a good guy in the comics at all. And this is tricky, though, because while this is Batman 361, it then jumps, you can see from the bottom panel, it's not necessarily connected, but chronologically, like the next part of the story isn't detective. And it doesn't tell you here which detective it is. So you have to go into Infinite or Google and figure out, look at the date of like, okay, this is July of 83. So I need to find the detective that's July of 83.
Got you.
But they kind of go back and forth like Superman triangles where they're not necessarily like part one, part two, but there's a timeline that you can, have a sense of. So the Harvey Bullock thing starts in 361, jumps to detective, jumps back to 362, which is a very Adam West style at times Riddler story of Batman and Gordon trying to figure out this riddle and making these leaps in logic, and Harvey Bullock just like his head is spinning and he can't figure it out. But
I think I've read this.
Yeah, it's a really good story. Goes back to detective, and then we get to 363, which is Nocturna, who is so far different from what you see on Cape Crusader, where she's a little girl. Okay.
I just want to interject a couple things. I have a couple things I want to say about this. I'm sorry. I had to wait.
No, go for it.
Here's the thing. First of all, watching the episode with my daughter, I was thinking the whole time, like, who the hell is this character? I have no idea who this is. And my daughter, we were looking. I think we're at like a Ross or something. I always go to Ross. I'm a bargain bitch. This is how I do it. And I'm like, and there was like a picture of like Wednesday or something like something, Wednesday from the Netflix show in there. And she goes, "Daddy, look, it's it's Batman," because he thought it was Nocturna. And I was like, close. But which I thought was funny because she was like Wednesday Addams. And the whole time I'm watching the episode, I'm like, who is, like, this is a new character? I'm like, whatever. I'm just kind of, dude, I love Nocturna. I loved her in this comic book. I had no idea who it was because she didn't look like the comic character.
Yeah.
So this full disclosure, this is post-crisis, right?
No, we're still pre-crisis by a couple
are we?
years. Yeah.
Well, is this Mensch as well?
Yes.
Okay, that's why I've read a bunch of Mensch a couple years ago, and I loved it. And this was I remember I loved Nocturna.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of bummed she doesn't look like her character. I mean, I don't, you know what I mean? Like, yeah. Which, by the way, the episode, all the Robin Easter eggs in that episode, that was pretty funny. So, anyway.
No, I had a good time with the episode. But other than the name, like there's not a lot of similarities. The cartoon, like she had like this energy sucking power and her brother had something to do with it. And was kind of scientisty. But in this, she's an orphan who gets adopted by this guy, Charles Knight, with a K. And when he dies, when she's older, she finds out he had this whole double life where he was like a criminal gang lord. And that's when his actual son shows up, who's Anton, who's like, "Oh, I'm gonna, take care of you now that dad's gone." And he seems infatuated with her, and he's always like stealing stuff and giving her presents. And she got, like all comic book people do, they had an accident, and that's why her skin is so pale. But she doesn't have any kind of superpowers, but it's a great, I really love reading this issue. It's
a great issue.
And Mensch is so descriptive, and he just has a great, turn of phrase. And in some ways it's a lot like the show, or it's just a Bruce Wayne that I miss seeing for a while, because he and Nocturna kind of have like a Batman Catwoman relationship.
Yeah, for sure.
Interested in her. And then of course Vicky Vale shows up, and she sees Bruce just talking to Nocturna, and she gets jealous and runs away. But it's so fun to see Bruce Wayne being Playboy Bruce Wayne, but still trying to do charity stuff, and kind of feels like a throwback James Bond style. They're in high society and like kind of doing the social dance with each other. And then at the end of the comic, like you get the fun superhero action stuff when Batman fights Anton, and just Don Newton, just, man, I was reading a few of these last night at work, and just his art is so good. Like, he doesn't get enough props for this.
That's a great layout. That's a fun layout.
And the story continues from here, and it has to deal with Jason in a little bit too. And there's a lot of twists and turns. I've read other parts of it, but I haven't done it in sequence. So I kind of want to do that now.
It's so funny. I've read a bunch of this. I read their story. I read a bunch of Mensch stuff for when we were doing some prep stuff, fun stuff for the Batman. And I read this. I read the Riddler. I read some of that Man-Bat stuff. It all sounds kind of familiar. Because isn't oh my gosh, the guy who did Doctor Strange, the great artist, Gene Colan.
Yes, Gene Colan does detective, I think.
Yeah, because doesn't Mensch do both Batman and detective?
Yes.
Yeah. So like
in this era.
In this era. And this is fantastic stuff too. Like this is solid AF Batman. In fact, we may have to do a giant Mensch original era Mensch binge, because I remember reading these issues being like, this is really good Batman stuff. Like, and this issue, I remember loving the cover, loving the issue, and the character of Nocturna. So yeah, this is Batman, what, 327 you said?
363.
Sorry, should be 363. I'm just gonna throw the cover up again. Oh, thank you. This is a great. This cover is so badass. I love this cover to death. This is great.
And it's like just the observatory that they're fighting on. Like it just feels epic. And yeah, I'm gonna say it kind of reminded me a little bit of Batman and Robin with the setting at the end.
Sure.
But but this, I don't know, this feels different. It's not quite as campy, and it's just fun and entertaining. And Mensch really, I don't know, he was doing something special here, and I don't think he gets praised quite enough, especially because he comes back in the 90s. And I mean, yeah, he gets recognition for like the Red Rain trilogy, but I really, really enjoy this stuff here. And
Javi, we might need to put together a giant Mensch binge, and maybe before the Batman.
I'd be down with that.
If I'll say this is we're totally just having a casual conversation in front of people. So if you want to put the legwork in and get it all organized for me, we will effing do it, because I will do it. Don't threaten me with a good time, sir. So
I was totally falling down this rabbit hole last night. And the Bullock thing too is like he became so popular that he had to get redeemed. Mm-hmm. Like Mensch brought him around and changed things. But because I think a lot of people were put off by his portrayal in Cape Crusader, or at least some people were.
Yeah, I wasn't. Yeah.
But he started off as not a good guy before he became more of the film buff, lovable oaf, loyal to Gordon that we see now.
Yeah.
So it's been a while, so it was nice to get back to seeing some of the origins for these characters. Yeah. And there's a whole bunch of other things I could have recommended, trying to figure out like what a good Catwoman story that would kind of play to the sensibilities. But I mean, just right off the bat, I got a Good Gentleman Ghost for you, a Firebug, and
you got some fun stuff here, man.
Yeah,
for sure.
So I think you got a couple cool things to talk about too.
I've got one. I got one.
You got one? Were the other ones Chris's?
I don't know. Yeah.
Let me dip into these really quick then.
Yeah, go. You go them up.
Brubaker, who wrote a few episodes, Ed Brubaker, who wrote a few episodes of the show, was one of the creators behind Gotham Central. And so you've got, is Jim Corrigan in this? I don't remember, but you definitely have Renee Montoya. You've got Crispus Allen. I've read like the first arc, and I've just I was going to binge it all before the Batman Gotham Central show was supposed to happen, and then it didn't happen, and now it's the Penguin. So I never got around to reading it, but my understanding is there's another Firebug in this. That maybe, because Brubaker wrote it, might be why we see that character in the show. And then, of course, Kevin Smith created Onomatopoeia as a Green Arrow villain, where he said it would never really work in live action because what works on the page, like with him saying the words, the sound effects, like it just would seem maybe silly. But I thought it worked really well for the episode. So if you want to read his originals, you can start in Green Arrow, which is a great run where they resurrect Oliver Queen, who'd been dead for a few years. And then, unfortunately, Onomatopoeia goes to the Batman side of things in two Kevin Smith miniseries, Cacophony and The Widening Gyre. And I say unfortunately because it was supposed to be a trilogy of stories drawn by Walt Flanagan, and it's been like over a decade now. We've never gotten the third part of the trilogy. There were two miniseries. We haven't gotten the third one, and it ended on a cliffhanger. So
sounds
if you
like
decide
Kevin
you want to
Smith.
read, Onomatopoeia versus Batman, just know you're not going to get a conclusion. So, but I believe those were Chris's recommendations. And what you got for us, Paul?
All right. So I love Batman. I can throw my weight around with Batman every once in a while, but I gotta go with the low hanging fruit. And I'm sorry, y'all. I just have to. So
I mean, don't apologize for this comic.
This is, and you're gonna love this in a second, Javi. I'm recommending Batman First Night, which is just came out, and you can buy this. I looked online. There's like $30 for this issue. I'm like,
just for the first.
Apparently,
wow,
that's what I'm seeing. But
it's like
first
an
night,
$8 comic, right?
yeah. So it's like double, all over double. I just want to blow myself up there for a minute so I can show that off for a second. The thing is with this series, which is really interesting, is listen. I don't like low hanging fruit. I don't like going with the obvious choices because obviously this takes place in like, this takes place in
the
the
original
same kind of
Batman
era.
year one.
Yeah, year one, 1940s, but I gotta tell you, Dan Jurgens, Mike Perkins, Mike Spicer, they deliver a quality comic, and as you guys can see, this is a prestige format black label book, so it's chef's kiss. It's so good, and I love this. I wish I read it faster because I read the first issue and then I kept waiting for the second issue and I kept putting it off. And not because I didn't like it, I wanted to read it kind of when I had some moments to really like savor it. Because to me, this comic is something you want to sit down and really dive into because there's a lot of detail, a lot of subtlety, I think, in this that I think is really good. It's not like overly like super artsy or super like thrilling. I don't want to compare it to like Dark Knight Returns or Watchmen, but it's really high end Batman content in my opinion. And if you loved the aesthetic of obviously of the Cape Crusader, again, low hanging fruit. It's like a no duh, but really, honestly, guys, this is a quality comic, and the hardcover I'm assuming is coming out any minute now. So, this is definitely worth reading. It's fantastic. Go pick it up. It's super good. And to me, like, yeah, this is. I said before the show, we've gotten in the last 5 years some of the best Batman stories, I think, in the last 10, 15 years. And that's saying a lot. And I would put Batman First Night up there with them. Maybe top 5 in the last 10, 15 years. I honestly would say that. And I've read a lot of Batman. I can say that. And
November 5th.
There you go, November 5th.
November 5th.
No, please, thank you.
Out.
There you go. And you know what? I may buy it, Javi, but I also like, do I want like a nice hardcover, like an absolute? Because I'd buy this in absolute, no question, in a heartbeat.
I would be interested to see how they would do that because the format of these Prestige Plus books is a little bit wider. So I don't know if the art would translate one for one.
Maybe.
But it's definitely something that I bought the first issue just to have the first issue. Didn't buy the other ones, not because I didn't love them, but because this is like a bookshelf. It's a bookshelf worthy. It needs like a hardcover to be on your shelf. It's bookshelf worthy edition,
Yeah. And I think if you really liked Cape Crusader and the whole aesthetic, this is a must buy. It's not just a must buy because you love the aesthetic, because it's a great Batman story. It is a quality 10 out of 10, or you could say 9 out of 10 if you want to be really nitpicky. This is a high quality comic to go buy and dive into. And if you want to hear me talk about it more, Batman Book Club in December. Let's gotta throw that out there. Thank you, Ryan. I love you. Mwah, mwah. So anyway, yeah, those are our recommendations. Another great, fun episode. Javi, before we say goodbye to everybody.
Before you get to that part, I just want to echo your First Night recommendation. You can hear further thoughts on the original BOF podcast 233, where I lead a discussion talking about it. But if you look at if you really like Cape Crusader, you want to explore more in that era, but like seeing art and dialogue like this, where it's a little of the period, and you want more of a modern sensibility, then please, by all means, go pick up First Night, because that's right in that sweet spot for Cape Crusader.
Yeah.
But, that's all I wanted to add about that. It's a great book, and I give it a high recommendation.
Yeah, no, totally. And so I'm going to say this right now. Yeah, December. We'll talk about the binge eventually, probably when it gets closer to Matt Reeves' Batman sequel. But for me to get talk about it, Batman Book Club. I think me and Lauer kind of talked about it December sometime. So get stoked.
Looking forward to that.
To be whenever me and Ryan get together, it's a hoot. I love that guy. So yeah, Javi. So for people who don't know, I'll be out of commission next week. So we're gonna have I'll be posting my rant of Doctor Doom next week for an episode because it's worthy. I think it's worthy enough of a rant to post by itself. So that'll take the place of an episode next week. But the week after, we have a fun kind of a new beginning, if you will. Javi, why don't you explain a little bit what's going down?
So we've got Knights Never Die, which is our series within a series. You've got a Legion series. You had the 52 series with the Carusos, but we're trying to get Paul hyped. We're trying to get all of you hyped. And we've definitely done certain episodes with other podcasters and other guests where we've praised to the heavens Philip Kennedy Johnson's Action Comics run. And really, we just want to take everybody and build up our own hype as well. And we're going to do a road to Superman. And the goal is to do at least one a month and, kind of hit some important stories that are going to get you ready for hopefully one of the biggest hits of next summer, 2025 Superman. So we're going to start it off with a blockbuster of a story, Panic in the Sky. So it's got its history in some other, the origin of the title, at least, harkens back to the Adventures of Superman and Lois and Clark did stories where a giant meteor was coming towards Metropolis. This is a little different though, because it's Brainiac, and it's going to take, as you can see, all of the Justice League combined to deal with this threat. And it's a pretty appropriate way to start this off, because as we've seen from, behind the set photos, if you've looked at those, or from casting, more than just Superman is in the movie. You've got Hawkgirl and Mr. Terrific and Green Lantern Guy Gardner. So I think starting off like a summer blockbuster of a comic to get us prepared for, the movie to come is a good start to the show. What do you think, Paul?
Yeah. So, for those who don't know, we are doing, it's DC Studios build up towards the Superman movie. And it's going to be a big deal. Anytime Superman gets on the screen, it's a big deal. He's an iconic character, a household name. It's a big deal. And I think some of the best Superman comics that are coming out right now are the new series. And with that, I think a lot of people maybe have overlooked or don't take Superman seriously. And I think right now we're going to be focusing on some of the best stories for you guys to get ready for Superman. And then again, for people who might be watching these episodes after the movie comes out, if they're stoked about watching Superman, they'll have a great episodes for people to listen to us talk about the episodes or talk about the comic book series afterwards. So it kind of works either way. And the whole point is to get people stoked about the movie and what's the mission statement, read more comics. So
yeah,
DC Studios Superman, this is the road to DC Universe's Superman. We're going to basically go with some, maybe some undiscovered, maybe underappreciated gems a little bit, like for Javi and Chris's favorite Superman comics. And as we go the next 11 months or however long it is, as we go down, they're going to get some heavy hitters and maybe get some special guests. I don't know. We'll see if I can grab. But we're going to be talking about some big Superman stories leading up to the James Gunn's movie coming up. So very excited. Very excited. That's in 2 weeks. We'll do first episode. So it's a road. I guess it's tentatively it's basically called the Road to DC Studios Superman. So episode 1, Panic in the Sky, 2 weeks from now or ish from now. I'm excited. So Javi, anything else you want to add before we head out of here?
No, I'm super excited for that because we'll get into it too when we get to the show. But I did not read a lot of Superman growing up pre like 1994, and it was something I kind of dismissed. And as I got older and started getting more into the character, like those comics just blew me away and how good they were and how intricate the storylines were, and it wasn't what I expected. So I'm sure there's a lot of people that aren't aware of just how cool Superman comics can be. So I'm really happy to be talking about that and shine that spotlight. And just in general, since we're closing out here, we've also got Knights Never Die coming back soon this month. That's the plan. It's always a plan. You can find me on batman-on-film.com, where I'm co-hosting episodes of Batman Animation, talking about, right now we're definitely in Cape Crusader mode, and Bill has been writing written reviews, one a week of every episode, and dropping a podcast with different guests, different hosts. So just keeping it fresh, and definitely go check that out. Should hopefully get another Flash episode up on my YouTube channel, up to speed with Wally West soon. And just reading more comics, man. I read so many comics yesterday, but I mean, does it really work when you're doing something fun like that? Not really.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
It is work, but it's the best effing work of all time, in my opinion. So, all right. Yeah. Go subscribe, like the video, go check out the other older content, other content. And, Javi, why don't you take us out, my friend?
Read more Batman comics.
Oh, goddamn. All right. All right, guys. See y'all.